Welcome to Plugged In, a podcast by Okefenokee REMC about our co-op, our community, and our shared connections. I'm Michele Hutchins, your Communications and Marketing Coordinator, and today we are talking about mental health. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and joining me today is Marty Edwards with Breakthroughs of North Florida. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Marty, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So I think it's important that I first address why this topic, why this for our podcast. And it really stems from trauma that we as a co-op family went through back in February. In February, we lost two long-standing employees within 2 days of one another. So that in and of itself was a very traumatic event for our co-op family.
Wow.
Loss not only for the men that worked alongside both of these guys, but just the bigger co-op family. One was 38 years, one was 28 years. That's a long time.
Yes.
And just our bigger community and family. But also, one passed away. He got sick and just passed away after a brief illness. Mm-hmm. The other struggled with some of his own mental health issues. So taking kind of that collective experience, thought that this might be an opportunity to elevate a conversation, raise awareness about mental health in the broad context, because the reality is we've probably all experienced it at one point or another in our life, or currently know of someone who has some variation of anxiety, emotional episode, depression that they may be struggling with.
Sure.
So let's dive in a little bit, Marty. We just kind of gave a brief rundown, but mental illness is a very broad topic. Can you sort of address or better define what we're talking about today?
Sure. Mental health is something that I feel like we should be talking about every day. So thank you for having me. Thank you for shedding a light on this today and this month, because it is so very important. Mental health is a very broad topic because it's different for everyone. It is not something that we can see. Mm-hmm. Sometimes not even in ourselves, much less with someone else. Right. So when we think about mental health, we are mainly talking about the emotional needs of someone, the psychological needs of someone, and the social needs of someone. And so those three areas are mainly what we're talking about when we talk about mental health.
So can we break those down a little bit more? When we talk about emotional, mm-hmm. what are some of the things that lead to that, and how do they manifest?
Sure. Everybody, deals with emotions in different ways, and it all depends on personality. It depends on, things that are happening around them, how they've learned to deal with things. But emotional would be anything from being sad mm-hmm. to being angry, mm-hmm. Frustrated. Mm-hmm. There's, so many different emotions, but it's those feelings that we have when something is happening. And unfortunately, when we're talking about mental health, sometimes it's not even that something has happened.
It's just how we've reacted.
It's just how we feel. Mm-hmm. And so that is one of the hardest things, for people to admit is, I'm sad. Well, why are you sad? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when people say, I don't know, they really don't know.
They really don't know.
They really don't know. And that makes it very, very hard.
Sometimes could those emotional I don't knows really be not necessarily any one thing, but maybe a lot of little things over time. They've just kind of added up. Maybe something happened and you kind of brushed it to the side and you moved on, but then somewhere down the line, something else similar to it happens. And is it sometimes we just get caught up and then we don't realize things are building up inside of us?
I think it's a combination of those things and more. It can be a buildup of things. It can be a change in life circumstances. There can be big life changes from all of your children moving away and you're an empty nester now, or a divorce, a death in the family. All of those things can cause it. It could even be seasonal. It can be something that, whether it is, Christmas and we all expect this Norman Rockwell painting of a Christmas, and rarely does that happen. And so a lot of times around Christmas, it's a letdown. It's a letdown, and we don't understand why we're sad or frustrated. So or it could be seasonal, just in the sense that in all of our lives, we go through different seasons.
Sure.
And, it could be a retirement. If you are a person that loves to work and your work was your identity, and now all of a sudden you're retired and you feel like you have no purpose. So there's so many things that can cause it, once again, leading to the confusion and the broadness of what you were talking about.
So we said emotional, we said societal, social, I think.
Social.
Social, sorry. Social. So what do we mean what do you mean when you say we have social mental health issues?
Yes. This is one that depends on personality. Some of us are very extroverted and we love being around people, and some of us not so much. And so I'm just going to use, COVID as an example.
Okay.
So for the people who were extroverts, COVID was devastating, because all of a sudden you're in your home and there's really no outside contact other than virtual, which is not the same.
Right.
On the other hand, it was kind of funny. The introverts in my life thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. That now that they didn't have to play the game, they didn't have to do it. It was nice for a while, but the problem with that is it just it magnified.
Sure.
And so even the people who don't really like being social, it was even too much for them and caused more seclusion. And so, really for both of those types, it was not good, especially long term.
Well, and there's been some discussion. I've certainly heard and read a few things about this. Would it be safe to say that, okay, the pandemic has officially been declared over? And yes, it's been, especially down here in the Southeast, we had a lot more
Freedom.
Flexibility and freedom than our neighbors to the north.
Right.
But nonetheless, there was a sudden change in our daily lives. We had to adjust. We had to do things differently. And coming out of it wasn't quite as abrupt as going into it, but it certainly turned life upside down.
Yes.
Is it safe to say that we're still kind of feeling the repercussions of that, and that we probably will for a while?
I think we absolutely still feel the repercussions of that, even if a person was able to continue working, even if there were not many changes, where for most of us there were. The problem with the pandemic is that it took our innocence and safety away.
Yeah.
And so, when you think back about when the shutdown first happened, I thought, oh my goodness, surely this won't last longer than a week.
Right.
And then it was, surely this won't last long. 3 weeks max. 3 weeks max.
Right.
Who would have ever thought that it would have lasted years? And so I think what that did is it created within all of us a sense of fear, a sense of being unsettled, in that, yes, we live in the USA, like we live in the best country in the world, but are we really safe? In an instant, things can be taken away from us. And we're just not used to that.
Yes.
So even if things have gone back to normal, completely normal, there's still that little piece of us inside that feels it can all be gone in a moment.
Well, and is it normal, or is it a new normal? Because I know one of the things that I hear from some of my friends is, COVID shut everything down, and we went from going 100 miles an hour to zero. But to some degree, it almost feels like the world is moving even faster after COVID. It's like we're back to doing everything we did and more. Are you hearing anything like that?
Yes, and it's amazing to me how during COVID and right after COVID with my clients, it was almost this sense of aha moment of, okay, I know what's really important in life, and I know that it's important to slow down, and I realize now that my job is not the most important thing, that it's my family. But isn't it interesting how quickly we all went back to fast-paced microwave society, needing it immediately, work. It's so wild how we so quickly forget what we had learned was so important.
Well, and I don't know, just as we had to take time to adjust one way, I think everybody's still adjusting that way
Absolutely.
as well. And then the third one,
let's see, we had
emotional,
psychological. Yes. So psychological would be the piece of when we talk about our brains and how our brains work, there have been, I certainly don't want to quote statistics or talk about research that I don't know about, but, there is research that indicates that there could possibly be issues that have to do with, chemicals in our brain and things like that. There's really nothing that's ever been conclusive, other than we know that medication has been known to help people with psychological problems. But other than that, it's still just kind of a very broad, once again, using that word, just still a very broad topic, in the sense that there's still so much that we don't know.
So we've talked about the three different drivers or types of mental health issues, but the things that we tend to be more familiar with are anxiety. You hear people being anxious, socially anxious, or just anxious in general, that it keeps them from being able to function. There's depression.
Yes.
There and in our case, what kind of drove us to this was the whole grief. And one of the things we did as a co-op was share with our employees resources that they could reach out to should they need assistance.
Wonderful.
And kind of working through, because you never know what one thing's going to trigger in something else, like you said, and there's no timeline.
Right.
And it's safe to say that sometimes things manifest, even though they're not touchable, they can manifest physically.
Absolutely. And so, for your company to reach out and provide resources is just phenomenal, to have that conversation, because it's okay to not be okay. We think that we are strong. We think, well, I can deal with this. I've got this. How many times do we say this? We even tell our friends that, you got this,
Suck it up, buttercup.
Yeah, like you got this, you can do this, and it's great to be an encourager. I don't mean that, but
of course.
But if you are not okay, it is really okay, and it's okay to talk about it and tell someone. And if that is made available, people are more likely to get the help. So,
like you mentioned, there's a lot of research and a lot of statistics, and so before coming to this discussion, I did a little bit, and there are a lot of numbers. A couple that sort of stuck with me was that something like 21% of American adults, or 50 million Americans, are struggling with some form of mental illness.
Right. And that's what's been reported.
And that's been what's reported. The other part of that was 1 in 10 adolescents are struggling with depression.
Yes.
Such that it does impact their ability to function as part of a family, at school, socially. And then one other number that really struck me was that the length of time it takes from recognition or diagnosis of an issue to treatment of an issue is 11 years. React to some of that. I mean, what do in the such that you you see this every day. How does that jive with what you see every day?
Sadly, it makes sense because once again, it is not something that we can run a blood test. Strep, we know it's strep in a few hours and we know what antibiotic we need. The doctor prescribes it, we take it, we're fine. With a mental illness or, any type of thing that a person is struggling with, first of all, it takes a long time for the person to sometimes even recognize it in themselves.
So I have a friend who was a primary care physician, and I heard her do a talk one time, kind of a community discussion, and it was about mental health in the sense that your body is going to let you know
Yes.
if you don't deal with certain, as she put it, mental emotional baggage. And she goes, the more that your body talks to you and the more that you try to push it away,
Exactly.
the bigger and heavier the baggage is going to get.
100%.
So that some of the struggle is people present with a physical illness, which is real.
Yes, it
Never
is.
want to indicate that it's not real, but that it may stem from, as you're saying, people don't recognize, may stem from an unresolved mental or emotional issue.
Absolutely. Stress can cause so many physical issues. I'm not a doctor, so I do not want to talk out of turn.
Sure.
But yes, just from the things that we see in our office alone, stress, I have clients that their hair is falling out, from stress.
Digestive issues.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And I know even with me, some years back when I was going through a lot of stress, one thing that I didn't realize it was stress. I thought I had early onset Alzheimer's because I couldn't. I was losing words.
Oh.
I couldn't. People would ask me a question, and it was like I knew the question and I knew the answer, but I couldn't get it out. Scared me to death. But even something like that, come to find out, I was just so stressed.
Sure.
So, even things like that you would never think, would be stress. So definitely listen to your body for sure.
Yes. We're having this discussion to help, I guess, alleviate stigma, because for a long, long time, and I guess that's my question, there was a stigma about talking about mental health. How much of that do you think still exists?
I do think that the stigma is changing. I think it's an ongoing thing. I definitely think it's better than it was many years ago. I think we still have a long way to go. I think that mental illness needs to be recognized more by our employers, by insurance companies, doctors, anybody in the medical field. It is changing, but we do have a long way to go.
Kind of related to that, yes, it doesn't get talked about maybe on a one-on-one basis as much as it should, or we don't recognize it in ourselves as much as we should. But certainly on the news, there's a lot of headlines that as they report the news, say a particular incident or tragedy or situation occurred stemming from an individual struggling with
Mental illness.
Yes.
Yes.
Does that mean it's happening more frequently, or is it that we're just talking about it more?
Wow. That's a tough one. Not sure if we'll ever really know the answer to that. But once again, it's probably a combination of both, in the sense that we do talk about it more. You do hear about it on the news more, which, as sad as it is to hear those things, I do feel like it is forcing everyone to open their eyes and look at it and not push it aside and say, oh, that sounds bad. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. It's forcing us to open our eyes and really look at what's going on. On the other hand, I do think that there could possibly be more, and I don't want to blame anything, but in looking at social media and looking at the internet, our children, our adolescents, they have the world right at their fingertips, and they are exposed to so much more than we were, as children and young
Absolutely.
adults. And so there's a lot of pressure. They are seeing things that, most adults now did not see until adulthood,
Sure.
So, and that's scary. And it does cause anxiety, which can lead to depression. So I think it's a combination that, yes, we are seeing more, but we are hearing about it more because the stigma is going away.
So that's you bring up an interesting point, because again, there are also numerous studies that get reported in media about social media use, and people just spending hours scrolling alone in their home, but feeling connected yet very disconnected.
Right.
How do you think technology has played a role in maybe making people feel more isolated? I mean, I think there's like anything, there's pros and cons
Sure.
to anything.
Sure.
But I think there's been enough talk that technology through phones and chat rooms and social media and the internet, like you said, give people a false sense of connection. And how important is a conversation like this?
Yes, I do think it's kind of ironic that it's called social media, because it really is the furthest thing from being social. It's sad that so many of our adolescents and really young adults now do not even know how to have a real conversation.
Right.
Picking up the phone and calling someone is like, what? You want me to
Answering the
call
phone.
them? Yes. Or to call and make an appointment. It's everybody's so used to doing it online. So to even know what to do to pick up the phone and actually make an appointment with another person on the other end of the phone is terrifying. I'm talking about things that we hear, at breakthroughs in our clinic. So, I don't know if there's been studies done on that, but we see it.
Oh,
And
I can tell you, I see it with my 18-year-old. She's not going to answer the phone if she doesn't know who that's coming from.
Yes.
Or if she hears my phone and I'll say, well, just answer it for me. And she goes, well, I don't know who it is.
Yeah.
So it is kind of interesting, just their perception of the situation.
And even adults, the older adults, I'm guilty in the sense that I'm a texter. Like I hate to admit it, but I would much rather text than actually call someone. And that's sad because, it's just different. Like whether it's my mom or sister or, it's just easy. It's just easy to text. But, if one day, if they're gone, I'm going to wish that I had heard their voice more. So, it's a sad thing, but it can be a good thing. I'm not talking bad about texting or social media,
Right.
but
Well, I think, in trying to pinpoint, if you will, any one thing that leads to emotional and social
isolation
and issues of anxiety and depression and just feeling disconnected. I you have kind of said, I don't know that it's any one thing. It tends to be, and it's going to be different for every person.
Sure.
I mean, even positive change or change by choice can lead to anxiety.
Yes.
If you will, something good can lead to something that you may not be able to identify as, oh my gosh, I'm a little anxious about this.
Right.
I just know that I'm feeling sad or uneasy. But it may just, stem from something that you did that was positive, but yet requires you to adjust.
Right.
To adjust. So I think one of the things that we could definitely agree on is one of the things that we're seeing more in, again, media, but is with our athletes.
Yes.
Michael Phelps coming to mind is saying he has bipolar disorder. Simone Biles pulling out of most of her Olympic competitions for her mental health. There was also a tennis player that pulled out of competitions for the same reasons. These are things you would never ever have heard or seen about. I think even as close as 10 years ago.
Yes, I totally agree.
So how do you think these athletes, these high profile people coming forward, and I just chose athletes because they're the ones that stick in my head as having been through it and talked about it publicly most recently. How does them sharing their experience help raise the discussion and maybe make people look a little more inward to maybe see maybe I am dealing with something. How has that helped?
I think it's helped greatly because, we look up to athletes and we admire them. And we also see them as so strong. When you're at that level of an athlete, it's more than just being physically strong and having the muscle and the skill to do it. It's also about being mentally strong. Mm-hmm. And so we all know that, right? About athletes, especially pro athletes. So when you see someone at the height of their game, just at the pinnacle of, a gold medal or, whatever it is, and they walk away, that is powerful. That speaks volumes. And so I do think it's a good thing. It is sad how much pressure, the athletes are under, but I'm glad to see that they are dealing with it in a positive way and that in turn, it is also helping other people learn that it's okay to not be okay no matter what is going on in your life at the time.
All right, so bringing our discussion a little closer to home and, kind of tying it back to what we as a co-op family went through and sort of acknowledging the fact that sometimes people don't even know what they're going through themselves. And while we agree that, you can't see the pain and hurt associated with mental health, it's not like a knee surgery or hip replacement or a broken arm. Sometimes there are some symptoms. Sometimes you can say, Sally seems a little off. Mm-hmm. Or Joe just hasn't seemed to be himself lately. So how can we help each other?
That is so important. We can absolutely help each other. I think a lot of times people shy away from helping a coworker and sometimes even a friend because they feel inadequate to help. They're afraid of what they might get into. They're afraid that the person might say things that they don't know what to do with or that they might fail them because they don't know how to help. But the most important thing is just listening. And to remember, and even, of all the years that I have been a counselor, I still have to remind myself daily that I don't have to fix it. So when someone is struggling, it is more about being there for them, listening to them, but not having to fix it. And so if you do run into a situation where a coworker or a friend says something that scares you or makes you worry, then find help for them. Find someone to talk to them that would know more. You can always find help, even if you don't feel comfortable.
So I think you said something interesting there. It's not about fixing it, but what is it about?
It's about a connection. It's about not even understanding, and that's another thing. I mean, we don't have to understand it. We don't have to agree with it. We just have to be and to listen and to let that person know that they are not alone and that you are an open ear.
So in someone trying to acknowledge that they're having an issue, and if you're that friend or family member they've chosen to turn to, just sort of listening and validating their feelings for them by being there for them.
Right. And one of the best ways to do that, oftentimes, if a person is struggling, they're not necessarily going to just open up to you once you say, "Are you okay?" So sometimes it's better just to say, "Hey, tell me about your day." Like, make it a very open-ended question. If you say, "Hey, are you okay?" It's very easy for them to just say yes. And
Even though their body language might be speaking a different...
Yes, but conversation over, right?
Right.
Because they were able to say yes. However, if you ask a more open-ended question like, "Hey, tell me about your day," or "What'd you do last night?" It starts a conversation.
And I guess that really at the end of the day is the first step,
Yes.
if you will, in sort of acknowledging, addressing, and moving forward from whatever might be driving the angst or upset or alienation or whatever it is that someone is struggling with.
Right. And going back to, social media, texting, when we have relationships with people, even at work who, all you do is text or emails, it's really hard to get to know people. You can't hear the inflection in their voice. You can't hear the tone. And so, it's just about being there for people and putting yourself out there to listen and to actually talk and develop relationships with people, in the sense that you can pick up on those little things that you wouldn't know in an email or a text.
Gotcha. So it's all about the human connection.
The human connection.
At the end of the day, that whether some of us are more extroverted and some of us are more introverted, still connecting one-on-one with others is really kind of how we're wired.
Absolutely. And when we talk about symptoms or signs, just little things. If a person is normally very outgoing, one that's always, in the office joking around, and then all of a sudden you realize they're not, that is something that you would want to try to talk to that person. Not, "Hey, I noticed that you're not talking in the office." You don't want to put them on the spot. You just want to develop that relationship and just say, "Hey, how was your day?" And then on the other hand, if a person is normally very quiet and keeps to themselves, but then all of a sudden you notice a difference in personality, maybe they are acting out, maybe they are being very loud. There's not one thing you can say, "Oh, well, if a person's being quiet,"
Sure.
Or if a person's being loud. It all depends on the relationship, the personality, and what you notice, that's different.
Well, Marty, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here today on a topic that, as much as we might like to be able to point to it and say it's this, or this, the problem is individuals are at the heart of it, and everyone deals with things differently and handles things differently. And so therefore it manifests, mental illness manifests itself differently in everyone.
Right.
But I think just helping people realize that it can be as common, I guess, as just a little bit stressed and acting out because feeling overwhelmed and not know when to start, to something significantly more involved, like you said, that may require medication. I mean, it's a very broad spectrum.
Right.
But that, you never know what people are going through, but just connecting with people, reaching out, trying to be there for one another are all ways that we can sort of help people take first steps to begin to maybe work through those things.
Absolutely. Or if you personally, anyone listening, is feeling anxious or sad, or you just feel like something's different, to please reach out to a friend, a coworker, a counselor. There's no shame in that. And I think you'll be glad that you did.
So, Marty, while we said that, just, reaching out, making a connection with someone that you think might be struggling is certainly one of the first steps. There are obviously other resources, professional resources available. Might you share your web address as one of those locally?
Sure, absolutely. We are located in Yulee, Florida. We do work with people in Kingsland, St. Mary's, all around. We can do virtual if needed. So that web address is www.breakthroughsnf.com. www.breakthroughsnf.com.
And NF as in North Florida. Okay. And then obviously we also have that new National Suicide and Crisis line. I
Right.
believe people just need to simply dial 988 and they'll get a live person on the phone to answer their call immediately.
Yes, absolutely. Very important number.
So, all right then. Well, again, thank you, Marty, for having this discussion with us today, helping to shed some light, elevate the conversation, reduce the stigma, and take care, everybody.